And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Ryan Metzler.
Hey everybody, it's Ryan Metzler here again today, and today we're going to take a look at a game by my favorite designer. We're going to take a look at Bora by Stefan Feld. There have been several reviews out of it so far, but I took a little bit longer getting to it, and now you're going to get to see what I think of it. This game is for 2 to 4 players. It's, of course, as I said, by Stefan Feld, and it's going to be a game that compiles a lot of different things and a lot of different ways of getting victory points, but it's going to use dice as a kind of worker placement mechanic, but in a little bit different way that we've seen from Stefan previously. So real quick, we'll take a look at what you get inside of this box and how to play Bora, and then we'll come back here and get my final opinions on it. So here you can see an individual player board for Bora. Now this game plays 2 to 4 players, and every player will have one of these player boards as well as the following components that you see here. Now on these player boards, you're going to see all kinds of stuff, but I know it's a busy player board, but basically you're going to have these little huts which we'll be placing out onto the main board. These are going to show where you've expanded to, which will be a way for you to get resources, and when you expand you'll get those resources. Now you'll also see there's a place for resources on here, and if you expand to an area that provides a resource, you're going to get that resource and place it onto one of these matching spots. So a stone goes on the stone, and you'll use these resources later to build your buildings. You'll see each player has 6 buildings with different pips of dice on them. So you'll see a 6 and a 3 and a 2. There's a 1 through a 6. Each player will also start with a God tile, which is basically a tile which lets you use these tiles like you're playing a card. So I'll talk about cards later, but just note that these are special tiles you'll get that will allow you to play as if you had a special card for free. In addition, you're going to have 4 of these priests, which will be placed out onto a track on the game board in order to earn points and earn these god tiles. And you're going to start with a couple of these offerings, which will be what you'll normally need in order to play cards that you'll start with. And these cards have gods on them. So basically, you're making an offering to the god who will let you modify the dice or modify the game in some way, shape, or form. Finally, you're going to have 3 dice, and you'll see these dice you're going to be using to place onto specific actions in order to take that action. Typically speaking, the higher the number, the better the action will be, but the lower the number, the more likely you are to be able to play the die, and the less players, or the fewer players, will be able to play after you. All of this information about the game is located on here. You'll see there's some spots on this board when you remove the huts to place men and women, which you'll get throughout the game. When you place them like this, and later you can upgrade them in the game in order to get a benefit. More on that later. At the bottom of the board, you'll see there are spaces here with some victory point values, 6, 4, and 0, and on these throughout the game you'll be getting goals. These goals, you'll have to accomplish 1 at the end of each round of the game, and if you do so without help, you'll get 6 points. If you do so with help, you'll get 4 points, and if you don't manage to do so, you'll get 0 points. As they're completed, they go over here, and if you complete all of your 9 goals throughout the game, you'll get bonus victory points. That's enough about the player board. Why don't we go see what the rest of the game looks like? So here you can see the components for the rest of Bora set up. Now there are several key areas here, but I'm going to start out with the action panels, which are these along the bottom here. Each of these is a specific action you can take on the game by placing a die on it. Some of them are actually double-sided. That's for the variant of the game where there are less players, but this is set up for a 4-player game. And the actions will be pretty similar in a lesser player game. At the start of each round, each player is going to roll their 3 dice, and the game is played over 6 rounds. Now, the goal of the game is to score the most points, and you're going to do that by completing objectives, which you can see some of on the board right here. They're many and varied. Some of them will want you to get specific things, like build 4 buildings or have 3 buildings on the mountains. Others will want you to, collect certain types of cards, but there will be objectives that you'll have. Each player will start with 1 of these basic objectives. This one is get 1 jewelry and have 1 woman. Whereas, you'll also start with 2 of these more solidified or varied objectives, the darker green ones, and each player will get 2 of these randomly at the start of the game, so they'll know what they're trying to get. But basically, at the start of each round, you're going to roll your dice, and these are kind of like your workers. And as I said, the higher the number, usually the better the action you're going to take is going to be, whereas the lower the number, the more you'll be able to prevent other players from taking an action. So you'll see here that each of their players has rolled their dice. Green has some high dice, blue has some middle and low dice, and so forth and so on. And in turn order, you're going to take actions with these dice. To do so, you're going to take a die and you're going to place it on a panel, but anytime you place a die, that die has to be lower than the lowest number already there. So if there were already a 3 here and green wanted to play this 5, they couldn't unless they used a card that would allow them to do so. But general rule, you have to place lower than the lowest number already there. So let's say they want to take actions. Each of these actions does a different thing out on this board or on your player board. The first one here is to travel across land, and you'll see that each player starts out on this board, and they start adjacent to one of these one fish. There are little fish here. They're not printed on the board, they're randomized, so they start out on one of these spaces, and that will provide them with a resource when they start there. But using this action, they can move across land up to the number that is on the die. So if they place a 6, they can move across land, and you'll see that there's dice on the board up to a 6. So this is a 4. They can move across this, placing one of the huts from their board out onto this area. And that would place them next to this 3 fish, which they could use a card. There's a God card that if they wanted to play it, they could score those points. So they would have to give up an offering. You saw those at the start of the game. Play a card, and they would score 3 points for being next to that fish. They'll also score the points for being next to the fish at the end of the game. In addition to that, when they build here, they get the item pictured on that area. So this would get them another offering, so that they could play more cards later. So that is this action. If you had played a 3, you wouldn't be able to move across that 4 unless you played a card that altered it somehow. The next action is the same thing except for moving across water. The higher number you place, the higher area you can move across. So you'll see this one is a 5, whereas this is a 4, this is a 2, and there's a 1 here. So you may not need a high die there. Maybe it's okay that somebody else already placed their 3 because you want to move across a 1, so you place your 1 under that. And you move across water. So that's how that one works. The next one here, I'm going to skip over momentarily. This 4th one is called the temple track, and that's going to let you place your priests that you have out onto the temple track on the board, equal to or less than the number of die that you placed there. So if you placed a 5, you would be able to place it on the 5, the 4, the 3, the 2, or the 1, and you place this out on this track. This will do several things. One, the player with majority there will get a God tile at the end of the round, and these are basically wild cards that do not require offerings and let you play as if you had any of these cards in this deck. In addition to that, they're going to get you points at the end of the round for each guy you have there. And when you place your priest here, you're going to get a bonus. It's called a fire bonus, and it gives you the choice of collecting different things. One would be a tattoo on this track here, or you could get a shell, which is going to be a form of currency in the game. In addition, you could draw a card. Or you could get an offering. So if you needed different cards in order to do something with your cards, or you needed more offerings to play your cards, you could get those things by placing out there. And every time you place on one of these little fire things, you're going to get those things. So a card and a tattoo or a shell and whatever combination you want. So that's how the God track works. The next here is the building area. Not the buildings you place on the board, not these huts, but different buildings that require the resources on your player boards, like I showed you earlier. So you saw you have this resource track on your player boards, and when you get these resources, you have to place them out there, and you get them by putting your huts out on the board onto the right regions. Sand, wood, stone. You get the idea. And if you ever get 2 of them adjacent, you can use those in order to build a building. When you do this, you have to remove those 2 resources, and you can build the building from your board up to or equal to the number on the pips that you placed there. So if you placed a 5, you could build the 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1 building. When you build your building, you'll see that you're going to get victory points, and that depends on what round it is. In rounds 1 and 2, it's 10 points, 3 and 4, it's 7 points, and 5 and 6, it's going to be 4 points. So the earlier you build a building, the better. In addition, you'll get one of those fire bonuses I just talked about. Last but not least, you have the man and woman actions, and these work exactly the same, so I'm only going to cover one of them. So let's do the women action for no particular reason. If you place a die there, you can take any of the women tiles, you'll see them down here, on the board for or less than or equal to the value of the die you play there. So if you play a 5, you can take the 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1 woman. And all of these women have different abilities that you'll get to use potentially in the second portion of each round of the game. So the first portion is going to be rolling and placing dice to take actions. The second portion will be using one of your types of men and one of your types of women that you've collected from your board in order to perform additional actions throughout the game. And then the final portion of the round will be evaluating the board for extra points that are scored throughout that round. So you'll see that you can take these men or women to kind of supplement your actions that you take during your turn. Now, I said I skipped over one of the panels, and that's because this panel involves things that are done throughout the rest of the game. When you place on this panel, you can use the pips of your die in order to accomplish specific things in the game that are usually accomplished in other ways. So you'll see here that there's a guide at the top left-hand corner of your player board, and it tells you what these pips can be used for. So for 1 pip, you can upgrade a man or a woman. Well, I haven't told you what that means, but when you buy these men or women with your dice, you place them on one of the player board spots on your board that no longer has a HUD on it, so an empty space. And they go like this, and you can use these pips on this die, so I have 5 pips to use, to upgrade them. And when you do this with men, it will get you tattoos, which will move you along this track, which is for turn order and also for scoring some points. If you do the same thing with a woman, you'll see on the women tiles they have shells. It will get you the shells that are on here, which are important for buying jewelry, which will be worth points at the end of the game. So you can use your points to upgrade your men or women throughout the game. In addition, you can spend 1 pip for 1 point. So if you don't have anything else to spend them on, you can spend them for points. At a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 pips for one of these things, you can either move one of your huts from your board, so let's say I have a hut here, down to this bottom space. It frees up a space for a man or a woman. So you can just shift this down instead of playing it out onto the board to free up area for more men or women tiles. You can also use it to buy an offering, or to buy a card, or to buy any one of the 3 resources that you need to build buildings. In case you don't want to use your dice for any of those things, or you can't use your die for some reason, maybe there's all ones placed out on all of the different tiles, you can throw your dice away for 2 points per die that you want to put up in this top left area. It's just kind of an action to take in case you don't want to or can't take anything else. It gets you some points. After each player has placed all of their dice following the rules I told you, either playing lower than or playing on the only place where there's a die, or playing the only die, the previous dice, then the round is going to end, or the first part of the round, part A, is going to end, and you're going to move on to part B. And during this point I said you can use your men or your women. Well, there are all kinds of men and women. They're all listed on the player boards, but they do various things. Some of them will let you travel across land, just as if you'd taken this action. Some will let you travel across water, but they tell you that you can only do it as if you'd rolled a 2. Now, if you have multiples of them, they add together. So if I had 2 women that let me travel across land, I could do it as if I'd done a 4. Or, for example, this one lets me take a man. There's men and women that let you take men tiles from the board, as if you'd rolled a 3. But if you have multiple, it could be as if you'd rolled a 6. Some of them will let you take resources, some of them cards, or offerings, or tattoos, or shells. But they do many, many different things. You can use one type of man and one type of woman during this part in order to get bonus stuff. After you've done that, you're going to evaluate the board. And when you evaluate the board, you'll see there's this whole area over here of several different types of tracks that you're going to evaluate in order. And it shows you here tattoos, then the temple, then jewelry, and then goals. So the first thing you're going to do is see who's furthest along this track, and that person is going to be the new first player, and that starts immediately. In addition, each of these players is going to score points equal to the number above where they are, so 6, 4, and 2. Black gets nothing. After that, you're going to restack these in the appropriate order, and the new first player, or if it's the same person, the same first player will continue on. And then you're going to evaluate the temple track, and you'll see who has the most people on the temple track, and that person is going to get one of these god tiles, which lets you play as if you had any of these cards for free, but they're also worth points at the end of the game. Now, people are only going to slide off of this if they get pushed off at the end, so only if they get, replaced and pushed down and pushed down and pushed down and slid off is the majority going to change, or if you add more than a previous person. After you've evaluated that and scored points appropriately, each guy you have on there is worth points in different rounds, you're going to move on to the jewelry, and in turn order, players who have gotten shells throughout the rounds by either upgrading their women or taking them through the fire actions are going to be able to buy jewelry. The cost is in shells printed on these little tiles. These are worth victory points and can be needed for some of the goals. So you're going to buy those. You don't score the points immediately, but you'll score them later. Finally, in each round, you're going to evaluate goals and take a new goal. So you're going to look at the goals you have placed out on your board. Maybe you have a goal to have a woman and 1 jewelry, and you bought a jewelry this round, and you just so happen that you got a woman through placing your actions. You would accomplish this goal, and you didn't need any help, so you would get 6 points. If you had needed help, there's a card that you can play to do that, and you'll see it's right here. It says that you can remove one part of your goal, but lose 2 points for doing so, and you'd have to play an offering and this card from your hand in order to do so. So maybe I got a woman, but I didn't get a jewelry. I could play this card with my offering. I'd lose 2 of the points for satisfying this, but I'd still satisfy the goal. I'd get 4 points, and I'd get to place this in my satisfied gold pile. After you satisfy your goal, you're going to choose a new goal from the board. So you'll see there's 6 available goals here, 2 more than the number of players, and I have to take a new one to place onto my board. In doing this, I'm going to want to look for one that I think I can accomplish, obviously, so I can score the points later. You're going to play through this way 6 rounds, so you get 6 rounds of this, 9 goals. 1 goal per round, and then 3 more goals at the end of the game that you have left over. At the end of the game, the winner is going to be the person who scores the most points through various different means, with some bonus points at the end of the game. Bonus points are scored for many different things. You'll see that there's 2 points per god tile, or you can get points for each of the fishes that you're next to. So wherever you have huts, you're going to look at the fish tile next to that and score points equal to that. You'll see that buying jewelry is worth points. And then you get 6 bonus points for any of the following: finishing all 9 of your goals, buying a jewelry every round, filling the area of your player board, this whole resource area, either with resources or buildings, is worth points. You'll see that you can get points for building all 6 of your buildings, so these two kind of go together. If you build all 6 buildings, you'll have filled all of the area of that, and that'll be worth 12 points. You can get points for having a building on each of the 12, or a hut on each of the 12 areas of the islands. Or you can get a 6-point bonus for having 12 men or women tiles on your board at the end of the game. So through all of those methods, you can get bonus points, and whoever does so the best will be the winner. Well, there you have it. That is Bora Bora. Now, you probably knew this before you watched the video, but I like the game. I like it quite a bit. I think it's probably my second or third favorite Feld game so far. It's not my favorite. I've heard a lot of people saying that this game is better than Trajan, and I will flat out say that I don't think it's better than Trajan. Trajan, I still think, is Feld's masterpiece, but this game does a very good job. Now, what I do like about the game is the use of the dice, the way you can manipulate those dice using cards in order to place them out. So I didn't go into the cards in too much detail, but there are cards that let you play a die as if it were a 6, meaning that you could play a 3 and have it count for 6 pips and use it to move across land or water, or take a 6 woman or man, even though it's a lower value die. But it's going to cost you offerings to do that. There's also a die that lets you play a die that is higher than the lowest die on a template. So if there's a 3 out, and you want to play a 6, you can use that card, and you can use them in combinations to play a card that's higher and also make it a 6, and so forth and so on. And there's a lot of different things to focus on in the game, and I think that's also a very strong point. You can focus on getting men and women to get points at the end of the game and use those in the men and women part of the turn in order to facilitate getting more actions. And of course, it's always good to get more actions in a Stefan Feld game. Or you can focus on building your buildings, and you can get resources and use your pips to buy resources and place more buildings, and you can buy jewelry and all these different things, and it's awesome and it's great and there's tons of stuff to do. Now you're going to say, well, that's a lot like Trajan, and yes, that is a lot like Trajan. There's all these different things to do, and you're trying to maximize your ability to do all of them in Trajan. Now, I don't think the same is true here. I've yet to find a dominant strategy in Trajan that I think is, going to win all of the time. Shipping is viable, military is viable, getting Trajan tiles and just scoring a lot of points that way is viable. In this game, I think there are some parts of the game that are stronger than others. That inherently makes it, in my opinion, not quite as good. I don't think jewelry tiles in this game are as strong. Yes, they're needed for some of the goals that you have at the end of each round, but they're only worth a maximum of like 7 or 9 points, and you can only get 6 of them through the game. And they just simply don't add up to that many points. Building buildings, on the other hand, getting the resources from either putting huts on the board or buying them through the use of the pips, is way better. You can get those resources. The resources are worth no points, but you can use them to build buildings, and building a single building is worth 10 points in the early round. So the earlier you can do it, the better. In addition to that, not only is that worth points, but it fills up that area that I told you about, and there's bonus points for building all of your buildings and for filling up the area. And the two, if you can accomplish both of them, are worth 12 points, which is more points than you can get for accomplishing any single thing else in the game. So I just think that it's a little bit more leading in terms of a dominant strategy. It's still a great game. I still think that interaction with other players can prevent you from overusing that dominant strategy. Bora Bora is a great game, just not quite as good as Trajan, but definitely one you should check out.
Thanks for watching our review today. For more information about board games, as well as the #1 board game audio podcast, check out Dicetower.com for reviews, interviews, and more. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.